much. This works? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'll give you a bit of time to put your headset on if you're more comfortable listening to me in another language. I'm not able to speak to you in either Spanish or Portuguese. I'm very sorry about that. So I'm indeed Nathalie from the DG Regio, the unit responsible for cross-border cooperation on internal borders, which includes obviously your well-performing Spain-Portugal program, which is one of the hosts of today's meeting, and I would like to thank them for their support. We are genuinely delighted to be here in Mérida. I heard the representatives of the region and also the mayor being very happy that an event like this one is taking place here. I think you can really understand from our side that we are very committed to border regions, and the fact that we come out of the Brussels bubble, as some people call it, to be with you in the border region, and not the most accessible of border regions, I think shows that we are very committed to this process. We know that we have to be present in border regions more often, and we will do that. I would like to first apologize on behalf of Paola Lacey, my head of unit. Some of you know Paola already, some don't. She's actually new to the world of cross-border cooperation, and she's actually Portuguese. And because of these two things, she was really, really looking forward to being here with us today. And she is very sad that she can't make it. It's not only that she missed her plane yesterday, she is also very sick. And she sent me a message this morning to confirm that the doctor said she has to stay in bed for the next few days. She gave me her speech yesterday by mail. She said, you know, maybe you could read my speech for me, but it was all in Portuguese when I opened it. So I decided maybe not. You know, it would be a little bit difficult for the interpreters to follow my Portuguese. So maybe I will share with you some of the key ideas that Paola wanted to express. And then I will move to presenting the communication, which was anyway my part of today's intervention. Paola wanted to remind everybody a little bit about the process and the background that led to this communication being adopted last September. And actually, it all started really in 2015 when we celebrated the 25th anniversary of Interreg. For some of you, Interreg has been around for 25 years. It's hard to imagine, but it's been 25 years. It was created in 1990. And we look back, you know, to 25 years of cooperation, and we had a big conference in Luxembourg, and we shared the happiness we had of all the achievements of Interreg throughout Europe. It was a really good time to, not to congratulate ourselves, but actually to be quite happy that we have made a difference in border regions, building trust, as was also mentioned earlier this morning, providing a safer environment in many border regions, also creating some wealth and jobs, at least the conditions for better jobs and better wealth. So we were quite happy with that. But at the same time, some of us, particularly those who come from border regions, like I was born on the border, we know that even with Interreg, there are still many, many issues if you live in a border region. And so we thought, well, we have two options. Either we continue business as usual and we continue with Interreg, or we actually take the time to look a little bit beyond Interreg at what are the issues, why do these issues appear, and what can we do? And we took that second option, and for 2 years we spent a lot of time and resources to study and make an inventory of the issues that we could find along borders inside Europe. We had a public consultation. I think some of you might remember that. I think I was in Evora promoting that 2 years ago. We also had meetings with stakeholders, some of them are in the room today, who followed the process with us also for 2 years. So it was quite an extensive piece of work. It was not only inward-looking and based on a study in Brussels, but it was very much opened up with the public consultation and the consultation with stakeholders. And the result of all that work is the communication that you have on the table. Our conclusion after those 2 years was that indeed Interreg has been great. Interreg has made a very significant contribution to life in border regions, but that we must do more, and we must go beyond funding and look more at processes. And this is exactly what happened with the communication. Voilà, so this is a little bit to set the scene. I think I have no control to change this myself. Yes, so question number 1 that I wanted to share with you is already done. I told you why we came to this communication. I would like to maybe highlight some of the issues that we have found out, some key ones, and then I will swiftly move on to what comes next, because I think that's what
there are thousands of vacancies on one side. I talk about my own border, for instance. There are many vacancies in Flanders, and there is a very high level of unemployment on the French side. And it's quite obvious that the two sides need to work together so that unemployed people in France can actually fill in vacancies, existing vacancies in Belgium. But to do that, you do have to work harder on recognition of skills and diplomas. Local public transport as well, crossing the border to go and work or to get treatment in a hospital across on the other side can sometimes be extremely complicated and very costly, because some of the routes are considered international routes. But really, are we seriously saying that traveling 15 kilometers from your hometown to the next town on the other side is international transport? It's not. It should be considered local transportation. There is far too few integrated cross-border public transport systems. Systems, again, tend to coexist, and in the best cases they are compatible, but very often the systems just don't talk to each other. And if you are a passenger, you suffer from the lack of integration. On healthcare, what we discovered was that here it's more a question of unused potential. If you live in a border region, it happens a lot that the nearest hospital, the nearest healthcare center, in terms of proximity, is actually across the border. And you could get a treatment maybe 10 kilometers from home, but it's on the other side. And it's blocked, you can't get access, it's not easy. And you probably have to drive, or you have to travel 50 or 40 kilometers to your own domestic hospital. I mean, again, does that make sense in the European context? We think not. So I just wanted to illustrate some of the biggest issues that we have come across when we were doing the study. And the reasons behind those issues, are very largely to be attributed to the fact that you have national legislation which are not compatible with national legislation on the other side, and you have regional and national practices, administrative practices, which are also sometimes incompatible. This is actually the bulk of the problem. A little bit of EU legislation there as well, you can see in blue on the pie chart, but this was very much a minority case. The most common cases come from national context. Now, what is there to be gained from looking at these issues? Why should we be doing this? Well, besides the fact that philosophically, I think it's important that we are serious about integration. There is also an economic case to be made. And Well, in Europe, we know that if you have an economic case, it helps most of the time. It's good that you can prove that it would make sense to address the issue. If you look at this map, what this map is actually showing you is the loss, the loss of GDP, so gross domestic product, so the loss of GDP because of administrative and legal obstacles. We have been able to put a figure on how much it costs these obstacles that prevent interaction between the two sides of the border. And the darker the color on the map, the bigger the losses. But I would quite like to present this in a more positive light and to say the darker the color, the more there is to be gained from addressing the issues. If you did find a way to address some of the key issues, you would really release the potential for more growth in those regions. Now you will see that, of course, Portugal, Spain is not so dark, and that's quite normal because in a way you have a very rural area with few people living here. It's not as densely populated as the ones which are dark in the map, but nevertheless, you look at the color, it still means that between 1 and 4% of GDP could be gained if Spain and Portugal were able to address some of the blockages along the border. You will see that the bulk of the communication is actually an action plan, which is quite detailed. And before I go into some of the key actions that we have proposed, I would like to make a comment on what is to me a precondition for this action plan to succeed, to have any chance actually of succeeding. And it's the multi-level governance, and also what somebody mentioned already in the opening session, the goodwill and the political will to do something. It will be absolutely essential, if we are to succeed, that the different levels of government work with each other. We must do that. If one of the levels is not committed or not willing, it's unlikely that we will succeed in releasing or removing obstacles. You know, those of you who come from borders, you know that the obstacles are experienced and felt locally by the population who lives there and by the businesses who are operating there. But the solutions to the obstacles are not very often to be found locally. The solutions are very often elsewhere. And this is why we really need this up and down movement all the time of the obstacles that are felt must be not only identified but communicated upwards so that the right level can actually look into that and address that. And then the solutions must filter back down again to the local level where very often action is to be taken. So we really have to have this accordion movement up and down if we want to be successful. Because the root causes are mostly of a national nature, I think member states, and we have here in the room several representatives of member states. Member states have a very important role to play. In Europe, we can push this, and we can encourage, and we can promote cooperation, and we can finance projects, and we can showcase good practices. But apart from that, I don't think we can do much more from the European level. The local level can identify the issues and really articulate them well so that member state administrations can understand and then take action. I think we really have to all do our part in this process in the coming months and years. A second point I wanted to mention is that this action plan needs to be coordinated, and we think that in the Commission we should take that role in DG Regio. Of course, we will be working in different sectors, which are not necessarily the sectors that DG Regio is responsible for, but nevertheless, we will establish in DG Regio a border focal point. This is ongoing work. It will be operational already in January, and that will be a team of European officials, like myself, who will be dedicating their time to making the action plan work in practice and to monitoring and evaluating its implementation. So I want you to really see that we are very much committed to making this work, definitely, in DG Regio. So what are these 10 actions? Well, they relate very much to some of the obstacles that I have used before as illustrations. The first one is called deepen cooperation and exchanges. For sure, the diversity of intensity in the cooperation mechanisms along some border regions. I think you are very well equipped on the Portuguese-Spanish border, because you have solid and robust cross-border institutions which do a fantastic job. This is not the case everywhere, and so we want to be pushing for more of these types of institutions to exist. We also would like to showcase good intergovernmental processes inside Europe. We have those already. You have the Benelux Union, for instance, between Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, a good example for those who would want to follow that route. You have the Nordic Council of Ministers in Scandinavia, also a good example. How do we promote this? How do we make this known to the wider border community? I think we will do this by establishing an online platform. So we will establish already early next year a place on the internet. I mean, we all work with internet these days. This is the way. We will have a place on the internet where we can all go, all of us. And there will be resources on that website. There will be stories, there will be examples, there will be questions where we can actually also share views, share our experience. So we will put that in place, and we will animate that from Brussels early in 2018. We have all your names and contacts, so we will make sure that as soon as this is operational, you are invited to take part. We want to do that. We also want to identify some pilot projects across Europe where we would give a little bit of a push with some European funding for cross-border regions and member states and ministries and EGTCs or Euro regions to come forward with innovative ideas to resolve one or the other obstacle that they face. We will launch a call for projects early next year. I won't go too much into detail now because my boss, Lena, when she comes in the afternoon, she will give you some more information on that. So basically this one is a very horizontal action which is about tightening the cross-border community and making sure that we have a place where we can talk to each other and where we can exchange. The second action is related to the legislative process. Since a lot of the issues that we face stem from the lack of coordination between member states when developing new laws and new rules, we would like to look at how we can change that slightly, slowly, step by step. We would want to show the way in Europe by spending more time looking at how, when we write legislation, European legislation, thinking about the borders and having the borders in mind from the beginning. Having a kind of border blindness test from the beginning, when we think about legislation. What would this legislation mean for border regions? Will it have negative consequences? Will it be positive? Will it unlock potential? We should do that. And we have tools to do that. We have impact assessments in the Commission, which are very serious exercises that we must carry out every time we propose legislation. And we want to develop the border dimension of this impact assessment. And if possible, we would quite like to engage with member states to see whether they would be prepared to also do something similar on their side. Then I move into a couple of actions which are specific to one theme. For instance, supporting cross-border employment. Here it will be more a question of making sure that the public employment services around Europe work with each other much more than they do now. Try to reinforce the concept, for instance, of the EURES. You know, the EURES employment portal. They have a specific strand for cross-border cooperation. We would want to look at how we can make that even more effective in the future. And we are working very closely with our colleagues in DG Employment and Social Affairs on this. Next is multilingualism. I think again, you here in the border region are, in Spain, Portugal, are very well placed on this, but it's not the case everywhere. When we carried out the public consultation, people told us very, very clearly that they felt that not enough was being done in their regions to learn the language of the neighboring region. Actually, people told us that. Citizens said, we don't really understand why we don't learn the language of the neighbor from very early on in schools, for instance. So I think here you're doing that to some extent already, but we want to promote that much, much more across Europe. Learning the language of the neighbor is not only acquiring a new language skill, it's also learning about the culture of the other. It's about learning about the other and their ways of working and their ways of thinking and their values and their culture. And it's actually quite important. We are working closely with our colleagues in DG Education and Culture on this. Cross-border accessibility, I think, will be of great interest to you. It's about cross-border public transport. We are in a region where things need to probably move a little bit if we want to improve access. We don't have, we can't propose to you, a fund now which would say, well, here we will finance all the missing links. But we are working already now on identifying missing links in Europe. We have launched a study which is ongoing, and we will have a detailed map of all the border regions inside Europe with the links that are missing in terms of public transport, and particularly in the rail sector. And once we have that in place, our ambition is then to make the link to funding instruments of the EU. There is Connecting Europe Facility funding, Interreg funding, also regional programs funding. Not everything has to come from Interreg. You also have big national and regional programs that can do that. So we would then make the link between the missing links identified and the funding instruments. And then we also want to promote good practices. There are border regions that have managed to integrate their public transport a lot in terms of timetable, in terms of pricing and ticketing, and we will hear a story after coffee break on that. So that we also want to promote. I need to move on probably. Enabling cross-border public administration. One of the issues for citizens is very often that they need to fill in forms from the administration on the other side of the border. It's very often complicated. They have to have translations, they have to have legalized translation of documents. We think that e-government, and the Commission has a very extensive e-government action plan, e-government has the potential to resolve a number of these issues. And we want to promote e-government in border regions because they are building blocks and IT tools which already exist and which should really facilitate the exchange of information between administrations in border regions, but also access for citizens to one tool that would then allow them to provide information to their own administration and to the administration in the neighboring country. Number 7, yes. So there are border obstacles which will not be resolved in our lifetime. I think personally that if you talk about taxation, it's quite clear that there is no European competence on that for now. Realistically, we don't see this happening for the foreseeable future. I hope our children might see that, but it's not going to happen in the next 5 years, that taxation systems will be harmonized. So when we have obstacles of that type, where it's not about to be resolved in the future, we need to then recognize these obstacles, and then we need to provide robust and reliable and understandable information for citizens. And this is quite an important point here, because there are some border regions where citizens are really at a loss to understand the rules, to understand where they should go to obtain something, and how it works in the neighboring country. And here again we have some excellent examples of systems that have been put in place in border regions. I think of the InfoBest network on the German-French border, for instance, or the Grens info points on the Dutch, German and Dutch-Belgian border, where you have a one-stop shop for border citizens to get all sorts of information. And this is reliable information because it's not provided. It is provided, I would say, sorry to the interpreters there, it is provided in cooperation with the authorities, and it's therefore the right information and the updated information. We really need to do more of that. In the Commission, we have a big project on the cards, which is called the Single Digital Gateway, which will help us do that. But the Single Digital Gateway at the moment is a regulation, a European regulation that has been put on the table by the Commission, and it has only just started its adoption process, and it takes a long time to do that, because we have Parliament that has to agree to the text, we have the Council that has to agree to the text, and this is going to be at least 2 or 3 years before we have this in place. So in the meantime, let's make sure that border regions think about informing their citizens about their rights and obligations and possibilities, potential for work, for healthcare, etc., across the border. Then on healthcare, this is also very close to our heart, because we have heard too many stories of lack of cooperation between healthcare institutions, or lack of access for citizens to healthcare facilities which are very close to their home. We think that really we have to push for this to change. You will see upstairs in some of the case studies that we have put on the stand, the story of the Valga town. It's a twin city in Estonia and Latvia. It used to be one. History, is complicated in Europe, and history means that at some point the city has been split into two. But the city had one hospital, and the hospital happens to be in Estonia now, which means that the citizens who live, it's virtually the same city, you have to imagine, with the border in between, in the middle. The citizens have to travel 55 kilometers to the closest hospital on the Latvian side, because it's too complicated to have access to the Estonian hospital, which is 500 meters from their home, or 2 kilometers from their home. I mean, really, we need to convince member states to look at that, and to make sure that in border regions it's not about 180 degrees, that you only look in front of you. You must also look back, what's actually available on the other side. And we will want to do that with DG Santé, who are very, very committed to working with us on that. We also want to continue working with the member states who have established a working group to look at potentially a new instrument to facilitate cross-border cooperation on specific projects. Luxembourg and France have really animated this group the past 2 years, and they are really coming, I think, to maturity now. We should be able to move with them in the coming month on this. It's a very interesting idea to try and develop a tool, a European tool, which would allow, listen to this because it's quite innovative and groundbreaking, which would allow for the rules of a country, let's take here the rules of Spain, to be applied also in Portugal, on Portuguese soil, for certain projects, very clearly defined projects, limited in geographical scope to the border region, with, of course, the agreement of the national authorities, on a voluntary basis, I add. And this, if you think about it, this would actually be a fantastic tool, because it would allow you you would not have to play with two sets of rules all the time inside a project, which is what causes most difficulty. You would actually be able to say, that project, even though it happens on two national territories, will be using a single set of rules. And that would be a massive simplification and massive progress in cross-border cooperation. So watch out for that one. It might come out in the next couple of years. And then finally, we definitely want to work harder with you regions and cross-border institutions and with the member states on collecting more data and building more evidence of the cross-border phenomena. It took a lot of time, to get to this communication, and because the data is so ad hoc, in some places you have data, in some you don't. You have this type of data or that type of data. You have a lot of national data which is not comparable, and therefore you cannot draw conclusions. So we really miss a body of evidence to demonstrate the issues we face. And then if you don't have evidence, it's hard to make the right policy choices actually for your border regions. So we would like to really continue working on that. We will work with ESPON, the ESPON program, which is European financed. It's an Interreg program looking specifically at territorial issues. We have the Joint Research Center of the Commission. They are very interested to help us. And I was only last week, I was at Eurostat in Luxembourg talking to all the national statistical offices. So hopefully, also, you can see also here we need multi-level governance to build this body of evidence and to have a better picture of what happens in border regions. Sorry, I'm having throat problems as well. So anyway, this is what we want to do over the next few years. We are giving ourselves 5 years to do this, to make progress in the 10 points. We will come back in 5 years' time with hopefully results and hopefully a positive evaluation of what we have done. We want all of you to be involved in this. It has been a very inclusive process from the start. It must continue to be a very inclusive process. We are open for any questions, any proposals. You should really not hesitate to get in touch with our unit here in DG Regio. You have some contact details there. Please use us, but also, talk to each other, the regional level, the national level. See what you can do. Maybe there are some things that can be done quite easily to kind of boost a little bit and give ourselves some courage and encouragement. And we very, very much look forward to greater cooperation across all borders and with the Commission in the coming years.